Hey, this is normally where I say, Will Clark, come on the show. I really have a couple of questions to ask you. You were my guy in 1986 when you were a rookie, and of course, hit that home run in your first at off of Nolan Ryan. But I have two questions for you. But normally, I would tell you that piece, and then secondly, here's the show. Like, subscribe, do all the things. The little button is our. After 30 seconds, it shows up. Click on that. Helps out the show. But I'm also with my friends Nicole and David. We're doing a daily show, extra time show on the Vuelta. Check that out if you're into cycling, if you want to learn cycling and get into cycling, and also to enjoy the greatness that is the Tour of Spain, the Vuelta a España. Check that out. But on to the regular show.
And we're back. Generations, talking about my sports generations. As always, I'm Jonathan.
I'm Steve. Hey, everybody. We only got two of us today. Mark is doing family business, so we're going to try and carry on without him, which shouldn't be that hard, except it's a funny time of year. It's dog days. It's August. You know, baseball is heating up because we got wild card folks that are in contention. Basketball is nothing. Basketball is not happening. Well, I take it back. Women's basketball is heating up, but I don't really follow it that much. I think for a lot of weird reasons. We can talk about, though, a lot of weird reasons. The press seems to focus on non-playing issues, so I think that the sexism double standard hits that pretty hard. Hockey's nothing. Football is preseason, as we talked about last time. Preseason is not what preseason used to be in my game day, where they actually played the games. Starters barely play. But what seems to be rearing its head a lot lately, and we can talk about whether this is because of lack of on-field stuff, is money. And, once again, LA leads the way, and everyone is still talking about the Dodgers and the Lakers, and the idea that the Lakers would be sold in 10 months or 11 months. And, if I think one of the problems people have, me included, is we look at this from a fan standpoint. So you would think that you buy the Lakers, you're a fan. You like basketball, you hopefully like the Lakers, you want to have this product there. But if you look at it from just a strict business standpoint, which I know Jonathan's very good at and Mark's good at too, hey, the guy made like a 25% gain in 10 months, and you're talking real money, billions of dollars. So maybe it's just nothing more than a business decision. I mean, I know there's just all kinds of talk about the ulterior motives and what it really means. In fact, yesterday, Stan Kasten, who's the president of the Dodgers, gave this long impassioned defense of Mark Walter, which is essentially saying, number one, I barely understand the economics of it, and I've got a degree from some Ivy League school, so you guys don't understand it. He goes, I'm not even prepared. I'm not qualified to even talk about a lot of it, but it's business, and in business, people acquire debt, people do these things, so don't read too much into it. And the bottom line, he says, which he said adamantly numerous times, was that the Dodgers were not for sale, that Mark Walter was not going to sell the Dodgers remain viable, the Dodgers remain a very good team and determined to three-peat, and that was it. But it's seemingly that money is the talk, and I think what happens is that when there's not stuff on the field, people need stories, and the story's money. And to me, the subtext of this whole thing is the real money, which is, will there be a 2027 Major League Baseball season? Because once again, the owners are fighting, and it's all about, my understanding is, it's all about salary cap, which you probably know better than I do, Jonathan, but is the salary cap really just like a device to keep the owners from killing themselves? I mean, they don't have to pay these monstrous salaries and have it. So the salary cap is, from my understanding, my very limited economics understanding, is trying to make a level playing field so that no one can spend too much and buy something. But, the Dodgers have been incredibly successful, but the next biggest team, the Mets, have been incredibly unsuccessful. I think they've got the first, second, or third highest payroll, and they're not even in the wild card hunt. They're like, 20 games out or something. So money doesn't always do it, but that's what we're talking about. So, Jonathan, what are your takes on the money aspect and what I've been saying?
there's a lot to unpack there, and it's all interrelated. So let's start with the salary cap first. So the salary cap is kind of that's an interesting thing because you already have revenue share in Major League Baseball today, but where the disparity comes from are these TV contracts. So the New York Yankees, the Los Angeles Dodgers have the most lucrative local TV deals. And so that's what gives them these huge advantages more than anything else. And it's because you have larger cities, larger markets, larger people watching, more ad revenue, and that's where the dollars come from. And that's the bit that provides the disadvantage. And so the salary cap is a cheeky way to kind of, for the owners to say, hey, we can't police ourselves. But what's interesting is then you have, at the same time, while this whole Walters thing is going on, we also have the whole Ballmer thing and everything with Kawhi Leonard. And everything, at least right now, seems to be pointing to the fact that they effectively were buying things, most notably the Daktronics board in the new Clippers arena, and effectively saying, okay, this normally would cost, and I don't know the exact numbers, but let's just make them up as an example. Let's say normally this screen costs $100 million. Well, Daktronics, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to pay you $140 million, and then you're going to redirect that $40 million to Kawhi Leonard for a no-show contract. Now, this hasn't fully been confirmed. This is what is being believed is what happened. This is what a lot of the documents show. This has not been proven in a court of law. And quite frankly, it's not like it's even illegal. It's just against the rules within the NBA. And so it's kind of like this weird, owners want a salary cap, but then they don't really want a salary cap because they only want the salary cap for the players that they don't want to pay, but they don't want the salary cap for the Aaron Judges of the world or the Shohei Ohtanis when they can get them to come over to their team. So it's kind of like they want their cake and eat it too. So it's this very weird dynamic around that, but it's around money. And then the other component that's in there is how people are buying these teams. And then a third component, which really isn't necessarily in the news that much, but the fact that the public is also paying for the majority of these stadiums. So people seem to be against this whole concept of socialism or communism where they don't really understand it, but yet they're willing to fund stadiums, and effectively what they're doing is they're buying sports teams and they don't even know it. So if you're paying, in the instance of the Dodgers and the Lakers, what's happening is you are paying an insurance premium, and those premiums are then being turned around and turned into buying those teams. And so you don't know it, but you technically own a team, but you don't own a team, and you get no rights or privileges of that team, and then you don't get the benefits when you turn it around for a $2.5 billion profit. And so it's this weird thing that we're willing to subsidize billionaires so that they can have these very expensive toys, but yet they use the guise of, well, I'm in your community, so you should help me pay for this, and if you don't, I'm going to hold you hostage, I'm going to leave. And so it's this weird deal where you have money for players, don't want to pay players, money for stadiums, don't want to pay for the stadium, money for teams, and don't want to pay for the team, but yet you want to have it all and you want to have control of it. I mean, that's what's coming to light, because here we are in the dog days of summer, and it's kind of a lull in the actual action of the sports.
Well, what's interesting to me is I saw this guy died the other day named Dave Marsh, and most people I don't know. He was a rock and roll biographer, and he was famous for writing two Springsteen's biographies. So he was a big proponent of Springsteen before Springsteen became big, and they became friends, etc., etc. So I listened to an interview with him, and he was talking about how rock and roll saved him and destroyed him, and his essential rap was that, growing up as a kid, listening to music, hearing these songs that moved him, he thought it was all about the music. And then when he got older, he realized it's all about the business. And he said, rock and roll is a business. It's a very big business. And one of the reasons he liked Springsteen was he said, Springsteen chose not to have his songs be beer commercials, et cetera, et cetera. But he said he was naive in the beginning, and it broke his heart when he realized what's going on. I see sports kind of the same way, but now it's just so in your face. And I think the question, which I think is interesting, has always been this way. And because the show's generations, we talk about the 60s, the 70s, the 80s when I was kind of my wheelhouse watching stuff. And I'll tell you, back then, a number of things jump out. Number one is there were not articles and shows about money in sports. It just didn't happen. Now, you could also say conversely, the owners had a stranglehold on things without free agency, so they could kind of do the indentured servitude thing. But somewhere along the line, it went from owners who are kind of characters who like sports to savvy business people to now it's these multinational corporations, et cetera, hedge fund money that just, in my opinion, just see sports as a way to make significant amounts of revenue. And I'm not convinced, although I know they put on a good face, whether it's Steve Ballmer or whomever, that they're sports fans, Artie Moreno, but they're business people, and it's a big business. And I guess one thing that I think I understand, and you correct me on this, is you made a good point about the TV. In the NFL, which is the model, the NFL model is what all the owners want because they make so much money. They've got one TV contract, right? They may have a couple of TV contracts, but it's all shared equally because you don't have an LA station like KTLA or Fox now who shows Dodger games. I mean, I remember back in the day, it was KTLA and they had these cheesy commercials, and it was a small town, but LA was obviously bigger than Cleveland or Detroit or wherever, and so they could pay more. So now what you're saying makes sense. So I know the Yankees have a big thing. The Dodgers have a very big thing. And actually, speaking of that, in the NBA, it's the same way. The Lakers have a contract with Spectrum that pays them, I believe, $200 million a year. And Spectrum's think maybe we're done with this. They did it for, I think it was $3 billion. They did it for 15 years or something. But that's a big source of revenue. And if that goes away, maybe the Lakers sale isn't as good as people thought. So I guess what I'm asking you is that the Major League Baseball issue that the big market teams get so much more on revenue than Seattle and Tampa that they can afford to really spend the money? Is that part of it?
I mean, it's kind of part of it. So let's say I'm, Milwaukee, which is probably actually a bad example because Milwaukee's playing really well, and Milwaukee's done a good job of developing players the last several years, and they've been in the hunt quite a bit, even though that they've actually never won the World Series. But so let's take Milwaukee. So if I'm the owner of Milwaukee, and it's like, well, the knee-jerk reaction is I want a salary cap. I want a salary cap because I don't want Mark Walters to pay Shohei Ohtani, $1 billion, whatever the number is. But the reality is, that's not the disparity of how much you can pay or what the willing pay is, right? Really, all that is just suppressing wages for the players. The reality is you're just not playing with the same money. You just don't have the same access to money. You just don't have the same capital. And oh, by the way, presumably or presumptively, the other owners in the bigger markets just have more wealth. They were able to buy a more expensive team. So presumably they just have more assets to begin with, and they're playing with monies that you don't have the same access to. And so it's like, okay, their revenue's way up here, and really what you're trying to do is you're trying to suppress costs. Well, what you're doing is you're just creating a bigger advantage for the teams that have money, because now presumably their margin of how much they're making is much larger. And that's never a good thing when you're a small market team, because as inflation happens, as things grow, if your margins are bigger versus here, right? If I'm only making this much and I push wages down, okay, that's good. But if they're making money up here, and now this is their spread, as time goes by and inflation happens, as all these things go up, this number goes up faster in total dollars than this number here goes up because they just have more money, right? So if I have $100 million and I'm earning a 4% interest versus $50 million at 4% interest, clearly the person with $100 million is making twice as much as you are, and this is compounding interest, right? So you're going to hit that hockey stick at a point where it gets really, really crazy in the total net dollars that change. And so that's the problem. But so they're trying to fix a problem with a very rudimentary rule, in my opinion. And so it's like, if you really truly want parity, which I don't know, we've had that show, and I'm not even 100% sure that's what the leagues want. But if you really want parity, maybe you institute something like the NBA with this second apron, right? Where you start getting really having these punishments when you go above a certain threshold, where you're losing draft picks, where you are limited on your ability to use, your minimum, mid-level exception, or these different types of things, which limits your ability to, and your flexibility of your roster. If that's what you really want, if you truly want parity. But I'm skeptical that that's what they really want, right? Why would someone who owns the Yankees, right? So Steinbrenner, why, if you own the Dodgers, Walter, these high profile guys, why would you want that? And so you're going to need, I guess, 2/3 of all the other owners to outvote you for something that you don't want and you want to protect. And so you can sell them on, well, let's do a salary cap. And you can get them to buy in on a salary cap, but you can't, loop them into a revenue share.
Well,
So that's kind of some of those things, right?
well, what's interesting on a sports level, on the field level, is does it even work? I mean, if you look at the Mets and you look at the Brewers, or you look at the Mets and you look at Tampa, I mean, there's these monster disparities in spending. Yet on the field, Tampa is very successful, Milwaukee's very successful. The Mets are a train wreck, and they've been a train wreck for years. And even the Dodgers, who have won 2 World Series in a row, if you look back at the games, the actual games, I mean, the Dodgers are a very interesting example because, in my opinion, they were very lucky. I mean, how they won Game 7, I have absolutely no idea last year. So, by all rights, Toronto should have won. And Toronto was a big spender also. But I'm just saying that the money doesn't guarantee anything. And although with the Dodgers, they're rolling in August and they get the best pitcher on the market, the guy from Detroit, and it is unfair. And then they have the luxury, if you want to call it that, of having these 2. I think they're both. I'm not sure they're both Cy Young winners, but Glasnow and Snell, who basically have taken the whole season off. I mean, they've had 9-month spring training, and now they're rounding in the shape. And I think Snell is actually pitching the bigs. And Glasnow, I think he had his last outing in AAA, and he'll be pitching the bigs. So you've got these 2 major arms who should be injury-free, although I doubt it. I'm of the opinion that and this is old school. I mean, I'm of the Don Drysdale, Bob Gibson thing, where these guys go out every 4 days and they throw 7 or 8 innings, and that's at Nolan Ryan. That's how their arms remain strong. Nowadays it's different, so it wouldn't shock me at all if after 2 or 3 starts, Snell has shoulder tightness and Glasnow has something. And my point is that, in baseball, I know this is an overstatement, but it's essentially about pitching. You're not going to win a championship without good pitching. I'm not sure it's ever been done, and it certainly isn't done nowadays. And so even with the hundreds and hundreds of millions they spend, and I think you pointed out they've got like $1 billion in deferred contracts on some of these guys who are really, going the wrong way. As much as I like Mookie Betts, I mean, Mookie is not the player he was a couple of years ago, and they still owe him, over $100 million for the next 3 or 4 years. So my point is that they run out of pitching, and all the money they spend, they run out of pitching. And I mean, the idea that in a World Series they'll do a bullpen game is just shocking to me. So you're telling me you made the World Series, you have 5 guys you can give the ball and expect at least 5 innings out of? And the answer is no, they don't. So, Ohtani, Snell, Glasnow, I don't have confidence in any of them being there in October just because of how things are nowadays. So the question to me is, what's this all about? I mean, what's this really all about? Because obviously money doesn't insure anything. And you just have to look at the Mets and even the Yankees, although I guess the Yankees are in striking distance of a wild card. And if Judge comes back, they could be good. But the reality is that, small market teams do quite well. And the Milwaukees and the Tampas, these teams are good. They're actually consistently good. If you look over the last number of years, they play well, and you got the whole Moneyball thing with Billy Beane. It's just kind of like, so it's not just I'm gonna spend the most and win. There's elements to it. So I don't understand what the owners are trying to do other than and then the other thing which I think is really weird is they want to. There's a proposal where they would not allow these crazy deferred contracts like Darren Judge and Shohei Ohtani, where I'll pay you $800 million, but it won't be to the year 2040. And it's so weird. The owners have a great thing going in all sports, because right now you've got a renaissance of sports. I think sports is clearly more popular than it's ever been in terms of asses in the seats in stadiums, in terms of TV revenue, in terms of people actually being really into the games and watching. And I know in our pre-production meeting you mentioned the Boston Red Sox. Now the Red Sox are not a small market team. The Red Sox spent a lot of money, but they're one of these teams that just imploded to start the year. They were god awful. They fired their manager. They were just a train wreck. And then out of nowhere, I think in the last 40 or 50 games, they're playing like at almost 800% winning, which is just unheard of. So it's still sports. It's still a game, and people are interested. I actually root for the Red Sox on some level now, just because I like the idea that somehow that they turned the season around without trades, without big deals. The guys just start playing better. The guys just start they start hitting the ball better. They start getting outs when they need to get out. So it's still a game, and yet somehow the owners are just determined in baseball, seemingly determined to sabotage things. I just find it baffling as to why that's going on, and it's probably more about economics that I don't understand. And then bringing it all back home. The Angels are not small spenders. They don't have a big payroll now, but they've been terrible for like a decade. And in that decade, Arte Moreno, not only did he spend a lot of money, he went after big guys. He got Josh Hamilton, he got Albert Pujols, he got Anthony Rendon. The fact that they all did not perform the way they expected is one of those things, but it wasn't because he didn't spend money. So spending money and winning are not synonymous all the time. And I just find it really weird that there's so much emphasis on this. And it might explain why. One explanation might be why I don't really have a good economics background. I just don't get it. You'd think that the owners should be happy the way things are because they're doing so well. Their franchises are all rising in value. Everything's happening. Yet they seem determined for some level to. It's like they're saying we can't sustain it because themselves. So are they doing this just to police themselves? That's what it's all about.
Right now, there's a lot to unpack there. So number one, money doesn't win is wrong. Money does win. In the long term, money wins. Money always wins. Money will win forever and ever more. Just look at our economy. Just look at the disparate wealth in the United States. The amount of money that has shifted over the last 30 years has been more wealth transfer in our lifetime and in the history of the United States. So in our 250-year history, there's been more wealth transfer just and not even the 30 years, really, since 2008. So when you look at that and say, well, you have the Rays and there's always going to be the plucky guy. There's always the plucky person that, they're scrappy and they're the underdog and they can do it. And we always use them as the example to say, well, that's where money doesn't always work. But the reality is that's the exception, not the rule. And just because somebody has money also doesn't mean that they're smart. So there's that component of it as well. And all those things, those examples that you mentioned, all of those players were great players. It just so happened it didn't work out. Injuries, addiction, and who knows? I mean, Pujols just, you've heard me joke about this. I think Pujols was always 5 years older than he always ever said he was, right? So his decline came faster than what maybe people thought. And that's just partially a joke, but, that's kind of like my explanation for Pujols. And so ultimately, at some point, money wins. Like, just think of it like this. If we were going to have a race and we have the same exact car, but you have 10 times the amount of money as I do to upgrade that car, chances are in the race, your car is going to perform better than mine. Now, depending on the course and those things, I might be a little bit a better driver. And if I happen to be a better driver, well, you go, see, money doesn't win. But it's like, yeah, but I probably had to exert so much more energy and effort than you did to get there because you had 10 times the amount of money to soup up that car. That's effectively what we're talking about. So there's that component. Again, when we start talking about just the money, it's before, and this is something when we start talking about generations, owning a sports franchise was not, you weren't like making cash year over year, right? A lot of these guys went bankrupt over the years, right? They lost money year in and year out. Like that was like, so owning a franchise was really like this pride thing. You wanted to do it because, oh, look at me, I own X team or Y team, whatever it might be. And the day-to-day operations didn't make money. So when you start talking about these deferred contracts, oh, I can make money today. I can make cash flow today. And that's where we start getting into this whole private equity kind of deal. We start getting into, your man that you were talking about, Condon, with the Trailblazers, right? So there's this concept of a leverage buyout. So let's say I'm buying a team, let's just use round numbers, $10 billion. It's just like a bank. Okay, I got to come up with 10% of that, $1 billion. Well, I'm going to go get a loan for the other $9 billion. You don't actually have the money. I'm going to go get other people to do that. And, oh, by the way, I know whatever the interest rate on the return required on that $9 billion, that stacked into the day-to-day operations of the team, I actually have enough money to pay for that debt. Oh, how can I help improve my cash flow on a day-to-day basis? Let's drive the wages down. That's number one. So now we're paying less on those wages. So now I have more operating capital that I can pay for that loan. That's number one. Number two, I do all these deferred salaries. So now my salary should be here, but it's really down here. And I push it all the way out here. And I push it out so far that it becomes somebody else's problem. Because now when I sell the team 12 months later, that's somebody else's problem to pay Shohei Ohtani in 2047, whatever he's owed. Not my problem anymore. And oh, by the way, I made my nut today, and I dipped, 3 years from now, 5 years from now. And that's kind of a problem in corporate America as well, where you have these CEOs. So right now, the CEO of Albertsons, as an example, she's under fire because they're significantly underperforming. They have changed their forecast for the balance of the year. Oh, but when she took over, what did they do? Stock buybacks. Let's do stock buybacks. Let's drive up the stock price. Let's do all this other kind of, financial engineering. And all of this stuff is legal, but why would you do stock buybacks? Well, I'm pretty sure her compensation is probably partially centered on, okay, what is the cap? What's the cap rate? What's the value of Albertsons based on the stock price and the shares that are out there? And so you're doing things to make yourself better, but you're not necessarily making the organization more healthy and more long-standing. And so then it gets to this point where you say, okay, the whole net that's holding the whole thing up, the whole structure is about to crash. How do we fix it? Well, let's do a salary cap. So then we can suppress wages way down. We can get everybody into a positive cash flow. In the old days, that wasn't the deal. The old days is like, I just took losses. It was a pride thing that I owned it, and then I sold it somewhere down the line, and that's really where I got my capital gains, or that's where I got my money back or my profit back in the old days. And then sometimes in the old days, what you sold it for, you didn't really get as much as maybe what you lost while operating it. So it's changed a lot. And the big thing that's changed all of this, and we had this show, it's Tellum, it's Rooney, it's Tagliabue, it's television. Television really changed the economics because that brought in all this extra ad revenue and all this other cash flow. And that's what's really changed. And so now when you have baseball and they have these disparate local deals, it's just, again, it's just different level of cash flow available. And that's, and I'm not saying none of this is illegal. None of this is like, on the surface, people should go to jail or anything else like that. It's really like, what do we want? Like, if you're a fan of the Dodgers, you're a fan of the Dodgers. You go back to, you probably remember Mike Marshall being the first player ever drafted in Major League Baseball, right? You were old enough. You're probably, a teenager when that happened. How does this impact you when you see this team that has been embedded in LA since 57 to where you've had your man who, McCord and all these other guys? Like, how does that impact how you watch and enjoy the Dodgers?
I think it's impacted it intensely, and it's made me far more detached about teams. And when I was in junior high school, let's say elementary school, junior high school, even high school, I was a big fan, and I really liked the Rams, I really liked the Kings, and Lakers and Dodgers. That was just it. Those are my teams, and I like the players, and I like the whole organization on a lot of levels. And then I think the Dodgers really hit when Frank McCourt took over, and that was a fiasco. And still he's apparently he's the smartest guy in the room because he still gets parking revenue, and that's a significant amount if you ever try to park at Dodger Stadium. I think it's $40 for a car and $60 for an SUV or something. But anyways, it somewhere it became a business. I think, although we're kind of mainly doing baseball right now, to me, I think baseball will figure it out. The sport I'm most concerned about by far is college sports, because that seems to be the Wild West with no rules. And I think a lot of what's going on in college sports will get out of the gray area right to criminal behavior, because they're just paying these guys crazy amounts of money. And I think the Bill Belichick thing is funny, because I do think North Carolina will be lousy this year again. But I do think that the model that you have a NFL style general manager to manage money is going to have to happen. And I do think the baseball owners will figure it out, because they don't want to kill the goose. They got a good thing going, and baseball is incredibly popular. I just read an article in the LA Times today about the effects of the last lockout, where they actually canceled a season. And it took a decade for baseball to recover. I think a lot of fans, if they cancel 2027 and there's no World Series, there's no nothing, will say F this. And right now, there's a lot of competition. There's a lot of other things people can do to enjoy themselves besides watch baseball. Obviously, the diehard fans will continue to watch, but they run the risk of messing with their fan base. So then you switch over to college football, which is just insane how it's happening now. And, it's as if, so you mentioned me a Dodger fan. Yeah, I was a Dodger fan. Now I'm just kind of an aloof fan. I don't really care. But let's say your school, let's say Stanford or Michigan or UCLA or whomever it is. Well, back in the day, maybe the students weren't that good as students, the players, but some of them were. But you would see them on campus. They had stories. They had regular things. You knew who they were. Now, UCLA, who I actually root for, because I've always liked UCLA football, mainly because I don't like USC football. UCLA football has maybe a 80 or 90% roster change. They have a new coach, and he took a bunch of guys from James Madison, but they just went to the portal and they got it. So now you want to coach in NCAA, you really not interested that much in a coach as a recruiter. I remember back in the day, it was a big deal. I remember when John McKay came to a friend of mine's house. It was like, wow, he rolled up in a Cadillac, got out. It was a big deal. The family, made dinner for him, and he did his folksy thing and convinced the guy to come to SC. And it was a big deal. And now it's now recruiting out of high school is basically non-existent, because if the guys don't play as freshmen, they just bounce. They go somewhere else, and it's not uncommon for people to have 3 and 4 schools in a number of years. And the question is, will that? I mean, it's obviously hurting college football. Will it destroy college football? Probably not. I mean, it's resilient. There's a lot of money on the table. A lot of these things. Although, I did read an interesting article the other day that said most Division I programs lose money, and so it's not this big thing. But there is a huge amount of money out there with TV contracts, everything else. And I don't know, Mike. I guess it gets the bigger question of which is better, back in the day or now. I have a very quick story of a good friend of mine who was a star at Long Beach Wilson as a linebacker, and I think I've told the story once. He committed to SC early on, and he was going to be their linebacker, and at the last minute they recruited someone else, and he was left with nothing. He ended up going to Riverside, which still had football. He was freshman player of the year. Butch Johnson, Cowboy star, was player of the year, but that was it. So I mean, it cuts both ways, because now a player out of high school has a lot more opportunity. They get somewhere where if there's a log jam, they can bounce and do something else. But at the same time, there do need to be rules, and there do need to be something, if nothing else, to save players and fans from the arbitrariness and craziness of owners or administrators. I mean, the Big Ten people are out of their minds, just like SEC. They're chasing these dollars. They don't mind if they're reading things. And I would say the same thing about baseball. I mean, the owners are ridiculous. And if they're mad at Mark Walter or Hal Steinbrenner for doing these deferred contracts, they should do something about it. But they shouldn't risk canceling a season to do something about it. And it seems like, help me, I'm gonna shoot myself, take the gun from me. It's like, yeah, really? So I don't know. I have a hard time finding a dog in the fight to root for. I probably empathize best with the average player, because in the NBA and Major League Baseball, I think the average is still 4 or 5 years. If you can make it 4 years, you're the average. And that does, in baseball, that does not include the vast number of guys who get called up for a cup of coffee, get called up for August or September. So I mean, the reality is most sports guys don't have it made. Most guys on the team do not get generational wealth. Most guys on the teams do not have it made. I mean, I know the minimum for baseball is probably like 800, and I'm not sure it is in basketball or football. It's a good amount of money, but you make 800 grand a year for 3 or 4 years, and that's not counting taxes and your agent's cut. You are not set for life by any stretch of the imagination, especially if you're coming from a place where it's not much money and you got a lot of people hanging on. So it's nice hearing about the Deion Sanders and the Aaron Judges and the Shohei Ohtanis and the LeBrons, but they're the exception. And to base everything on them just seems insane to me. So I don't know. I don't want to get a real negative vibe going, but I will say I like sports and I like watching the battles. And it was interesting what you said about how money wins. Maybe that's the American thing where we do like the underdog. It's nice to root for Tampa or Milwaukee, who don't have much. And you're right. All things being considered, over the long haul, money will win. But since sports is always kind of centered on performance and what could happen, any given Sunday thing, maybe it's a thing that we like, that where we like the idea that the Dodgers will run out of pitchers again and not make it, and the Brewers or Tampa, who has a significantly less payroll, will just do it by shrewd thinking, by finding the right guys, by playing the right way. Maybe that's part of it that adds to the allure of sports and the competition thing. I don't know. Okay, I think it works for me on some level.
If you look at baseball, I mean, I'm just thinking in my head over the last 25 years. I don't think there's a team that's won the World Series that wasn't a top 5 salary. I mean, the Giants in 2010 probably weren't in the top 5 salary because a lot of their guys were younger guys, but they had to pay those guys. So by 2012 and 2014, I know they were top 5 in salary.
What about Miami?
That's what I mean, right?
Money.
Just because you spent... What are you talking about? 2003, Miami? Like they went out and had Piazza, they had Sheffield, they went and bought all these guys, and then they sold them all off the very next year. So So just because the guy who spent the most money doesn't win, but all the guys who spent money won, you start getting into this economics and you start getting into this political kind of minefield, really, because there's this, neoliberalism, the whole concept of where, let the free market do its thing. I mean, that's kind of like you mentioned college football. That's what's kind of happening, right? Let the free market do it. And then, but what happens is when you start talking about the lockout, which is the same thing, and these guys that preach neoliberalism is like, oh, well, we want to cap, we don't want to be capped on how much money we make, but we want to cap on how much money we spend. And that's the rub. It's like, oh, they don't want any regulation on what they're doing, but then they want to, pay people the lowest amount. I mean, that's been kind of since the Reagan years, right? We've kind of come up and we've accepted it, and it's like, oh, it's totally cool. Like, yeah, like let people make what they want, and everybody in their mind thinks that that's right because they think they can go and do that. And it's like, no, you can't. 99.9999% of the people don't have that capability, don't have the opportunity, don't have the connections, don't have the different things behind it. And so you get into this situation where right now you just said college sports. College sports is like the green field. It's like anything can go. There's really no rules. And now you have private equity that's getting into these schools, and it's like this boon to go and make as much money as you can. And then they're going to cry foul when the regulators come in and say, well, that's a little dodgy what you're doing here. That's a little dodgy there. And everyone's going to cry, well, you're just trying to limit how much money that we make. And it's like, well, you're being a little dodgy with where the money comes from. You're being dodgy on how you're spending the money, and you're being a little bit dodgy on how that money is kind of distributed and who gets rewarded. So you're a college player. You take, your buddy, let's say he did go to UCLA, and let's say he does blow out his knee. He's cooked, right? He's not going to be an athlete, and he's not going to get taken care of by the school. And really, it's going to be incumbent upon him to finish his education. And in some instances, he might even get his scholarship revoked. So now it's like, oh, that's still all on you. And so these are kind of the challenges, I think, with sports, is we want sports to be this idyllic, free spirit. Everybody has an opportunity. Everybody has equal access. Everybody has an equal chance to be able to win or persevere or whatever it is. And then intuitively, when things are tilted, but then you have the exception. Oh, well, Tampa Bay made the World Series. Okay, they made the World Series. They didn't win. And when you look again over that long period of time, who won? Like, they didn't win. It's the big teams, the teams that spent the money, that got the big names. So I think that's kind of the challenge. And then it comes out to what do we want as the fans, and what are we going to put up with? So again, going back to the example, Lamar Hunt and the Hunt family. I mean, they're billionaires. And Kansas, the state of Kansas, and I can't remember the name of the town just across the river, they're going to go pay for $1 billion stadium. And they're going to give them access to all the retail and all the other stuff. So you basically said, hey, I'm going to subsidize all of your costs for something new. And oh, by the way, I'm going to move the stadium out of the community of where it's been. And that's always been like the thing. Oh, well, it's in the community. We're giving all these tax dollars, and we have all these jobs, and we have all this stuff. No, what's going to happen is it moves across the river. You're still pulling the same people, and let's call it what it is, lower socioeconomic people, to come work at the stadium, where the population isn't in Kansas, it's in Missouri, it's on the other side of the river. So you're pulling all those people over, and again, those tax dollars then aren't even coming back into the state of Missouri. So it's I don't want to be too cynical, because that's what we want sports to not be cynical. We want sports to be this escape. We want sports to say, hey, when we have the last 4 teams, we want to believe all 4 teams have an equal opportunity, and we also want to think that all 4 teams got there kind of in this egalitarian way. But when you start pulling the veneer back and looking underneath the covers and the sheets, you're going, oh my gosh, like, what? And I think that's the piece that I think that a lot of fans are now starting to find distasteful with Walters, is like, oh, we thought you were out here spending money and helping the team win and bringing us 2 championships, and this is all great. But wait a minute. We paid for all of this? You didn't really pay for anything? And now you're just going to flip the Lakers to somebody else? and then you have to have the president of the Dodgers, and then I did not read the Stan Kasten press release, but did he really say I went to some fancy school and I don't understand the money? Did he really say that, or were you?
No,
were you?
I probably paraphrased it a bit, but the subtext was that he knew a lot more about money than the reporters, and there were aspects of Walter's financial entanglement that he didn't understand. But he said it's business. He said that, it's nothing nefarious, it's nothing illegal, it's business. And that may or may not be true. I have no way of knowing. But here's something I used to like. I always rooted for Stanford football. And I rooted for Stanford football for a number of reasons. One, they're a good team. They had quarterback U. They had Jim Plunkett, John Elway, Andrew Luck, et cetera, et cetera. And usually, back in the day, the best quarterbacks in the nation would want to go to Stanford because it was a quarterback factory. But Stanford, to my understanding, had academic requirements. Number one, you couldn't get into Stanford if you didn't have a good GPA and you didn't do well in SATs. And that's just how it was. And they did that, and they competed. And they competed against the SCs and the Alabamas, who have very lax academic standards, and just how that's the reality. I'm not saying their universities aren't good. I'm saying that they look the other way, and a lot of guys who probably would not have gotten into university did because of their athletic prowess. Stanford didn't do that. Then came the transfer
Or Cal.
And then came the transfer gig where, Stanford still said, no, you can't transfer from Alabama or Georgia or wherever and just get in because you want to play for Stanford. You still have to, you're treated like every other transfer. Well, that didn't work very well. Stanford, went into the tank. And these were the years, not just Jim Harbaugh, but even after Harbaugh. Stanford was competitive. I don't think they were ever, a number one team. But they always could play, they could always play SC to a standstill, and they were good. They were a good, solid football team, and most of those guys, were smart guys. And they kind of, in my mind, and could be hype, but kind of epitomize the student-athlete thing where, not only you're a good student, but you're skilled at your position, and you can do it. And they realized they couldn't compete at all. And they had a couple horrible years, and then they hired Andrew Luck as, I think, general manager or something other, and he's going to try and resurrect the program with some academic integrity. I don't know how that's going to work or not going to work, but to me, it's a great story, and it's what I want to hear. And I do like the idea that and this kind of gets back to our main thing about intangibles. I do like the idea that in a competition, it doesn't always go to the strongest or the fastest. There are things that happen that decisions are made, or just stepping up at certain times to do really well. And one of my biggies is obviously fundamentals. You watch these teams in a World Series blow a rundown because they don't execute rundowns very well because they're too busy focusing on launch angles and stuff. But maybe that's just a myth, and maybe it's being naive on my part. But I like that, and I think that contributes to rooting for a team. You don't say, hey, I spent the most, so therefore I win. You say, my players are playing better than your players, and there's some competition. But it kind of gets the whole thing about how the players, and now certainly the students, are total mercenaries, and I don't blame any of them for bouncing to whatever school they want. They're playing for Texas A&M, and their arch rival Texas offers them something better, greater. There are guys from Michigan who play for Ohio State and vice versa. The rivalry is dead. Everything's dead. It's just about money. It's kind of the Wall Street, movie with Michael Douglas, greed is good. And I think that's permeating everything. And I still, even at my advanced age, I still have the illusion and the fantasy that there are teams that want to stick together. There are players that play because they respect where they're playing for, and it means something. And I think it should mean something to the fans, but maybe I'm just old school. Maybe it's like get off my lawn again, and maybe I just have, everything's passed me by. But I think the place that's most apparent is in college sports, and they're just a precursor to everything else. And it kind of gets us, bring us all back home to baseball. I'm rooting for the Red Sox to make the wild card just because of their turnaround. I think it's an interesting turnaround, and kind of makes you do the underdog thing for a little while. maybe that's missing in sports, and maybe people don't really care about that in sports anymore. Maybe it's more about I want to win. I want to have my logo being the champ, and I don't care how I get it. I mean, Steve Ballmer is either a very effective businessman by convincing the TV, the screen on the stadium to give some money to Kawhi, or he's cheating. I don't know the answer. I don't know if it's some gray area or not, but it really is weird that we've spent almost an hour talking about money and not talking about any great performance, any long touchdown run in an exhibition game, any great catch in a baseball game, anything like that. And I think that's become a component of sports that I guess is probably never going to go away. Would you say?
Well, and it's what I think it is getting worse, because what I think is what you just described, I think is what most people think. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but here's the reality. When's the last time that Stanford or Cal won the Pac-8, the Pac-10, the Pac-12? It's been, the Cal has not won the Pac-8. It had to be the Pac-8 when the last time their football team won, and that goes back to, 1950 something?
In the 60s,
like it's been
Jackie Jensen.
Forever and a day. It's 1960. Okay, how long ago was that? And so, but what happens is that story gets perpetuated, and, they can win. It's like, well, they can, but that's, what is that? That's 66 years ago? It's not the norm. And let's take your school, University of Oregon. They were terrible until when?
Phil Knight.
Until some guy named Phil Knight shows up, and all of a sudden, Oregon is the talk of the town. The Cal Bears were number 2 in the country. This is like 2006 or 7. Number 2 in the country, Cal Bears. And it was amazing. First time in forever that they were number 2 in the country. Ohio State loses in the morning. If Cal wins that night, Cal is number 1 in the country. And this is late in the season. So Cal potentially can legitimately win a national championship. And they go play the Oregon Ducks that night. And they get smoked. And the Oregon Ducks, that it was two defining moments happened there. Cal dipped and hasn't returned since. And the Oregon Ducks took off, and Chip Kelly took off, and everything went from there. So that's the impact. And so when you talk about how this happens, how we fix it, or how does it, I just find it so tenuous, and it's on us as the fans to say we don't want this anymore. It needs to change. If we're going to bear the brunt of the costs, which I think is fine, but we need a return from that. Some kind of something where there's some way that we're getting some, and I'm not saying that we get money back or those kinds of things, but, does it need to be $400, $500 to go see a game for just a couple of people? Those kinds of things. Where does it make sense to where we have some kind of stake in the game, you win and we win? Hey, if we're going to go and subsidize the stadium, okay, there's a little line item, I'm saying this facetiously, on my city or state tax or whatever it is, county, that covers it, but that gives me some kind of something. Maybe I get to watch the team and it doesn't get blacked out. It doesn't have to be big, but how can we all win? But that's not how it's working. It's working as, hey, I'm some guy at the top. I figured out some financial engineering that's not illegal, but it definitely looks bad. And I get all the glory, I get all the toys, I get the ring, I get the trophy, I get everything, and you fan gets stuck with the bill. And oh, by the way, the parking lot is still owned by some jackass who owned the team 10, 15 years ago or whatever it's been. That's the piece. And I think we're on this, we've pulled the string so tight, and some people are starting to see it. And they're saying, hey, we gotta ease up on this a little bit, because if we lose the fan, then we've lost everything. And I think that's partially why they've dipped over to college football, because in college sports, because they're like, oh, well, here's the new frontier. We still have a captive audience here, and we could get all those people in that pool. But I mean, to your greater point, yeah, we're about to wrap up, and all we've talked about is probably the seedier or less exciting or the shadows of sports, which nobody wants to really talk about. And I don't either. I want to live in the fantasy world of, hey, everybody has a chance to play and win and do their thing. And unfortunately, every time we turn around in the corner, there's something in the news that's brand new that kind of disjoints that, right? We had it with James Dolan and the New York Knicks, where he wasn't letting fans outside of Madison Square Garden. You had to pay to just be outside of the Garden just to celebrate the Knicks win. I mean, just stuff like that, right? And that's what comes out, and then that becomes the storyline. And then here we are in the dog days of summer. Football hasn't quite started. The other sports haven't started. Baseball's heating up. We're right now in the mix, and we're sitting there talking about this.
Well, I hear you. It's disconcerting, but I want to tell our fans that we won't do this again. We just rolled with this one today. It was about money. Next week we'll get back to more fun stuff. And yeah, I think I want to hand on your point. I went to law school at Oregon. I was there from 81, 82, and 83, and their football and basketball programs were atrocious. They were terrible. And I was a fan. I went to the games, and I went to almost every football game and a lot of basketball games, and they sucked. And but Nike was just getting started, and the money started rolling in, and now they're this juggernaut that does it. And interesting enough, I'm not a fan. I don't really have any allegiance toward them. I don't feel any kinship towards them. They in my mind kind of epitomize the worst parts of sports. And it's one thing to get a nice facility and let the students have better action and stuff like that, but it's this whole Greek thing. So anyways, started in on such a down note, but sometimes you gotta look at the world realistically, and that's what we did today. Next week we'll be back with another episode that will be more fun. Until then, keep streaming, tell your friends about it, and have a great week.